Welcome, Matt. We're here and with Matt Marino, and we'll let you introduce yourself and tell us how you got into this and what your business is all about. And if you were a superhero, how did you discover your superpowers?
That's an interesting question. I'm gonna have to think about that one as I'm going. I might have to have you cue it back up there, but
It's your origin story prequel.
yeah, that's fair. So my name is Matt Marino. Company is Homeland Hempcrete. We're based in Bismarck, North Dakota, and so we got into building around 2018 and built our first structure in 2019. Really spent a lot of time. We were self-taught. There weren't a ton of workshops and that thing going on in the U.S. at the time. So just read a lot of books and then just started getting into it. And so that was 2018, 2019. Started doing Handcast, and then figured out that Hempcrete has a lot of building with Hempcrete. Hemp lime has a lot of benefits. The end product, but the process itself is a little bit cumbersome, labor intensive, really dirty. And so we started looking for ways to kind of streamline that. And what we came across is the prefabrication and specifically panelized systems. So that's been our focus for the last 2 years now. It's really what makes most sense for us anyway, because we're in North Dakota where we get snow all the way up till April sometimes, and we get snow in October. So we have a really short build season. So being able to control those elements offsite is super critical for us. We can work year round, and then we can do installs year round as well. We did an install back in December. So we eliminate some of those variables and the factors. So that's really our focus now is working on, we've got a good product. We're working on the process now. Streamlining the process is really the focus this year, and working on the development of a bigger facility. And that is what we're working on right now.
Before we get into the scale of things, was there anything that first drew you as far as your motivating factor? I know a lot of people like the innovation, a lot of people like their performance, the design capabilities, the environmental stewardship. Was there any one thing or a grouping of things that drew you to explore?
Yeah, so we started this journey. We were living in Colorado at the time. So my wife and I are from North Dakota, more or less, where we spent most of our time growing up in North Dakota, but we moved away to Colorado, and we were on a health kick at the time, mostly like physical health, eating right, those kinds of things. We were starting a family, and so that's when we kind of came across the idea that your overall health and well-being can be a lot more than those things, and we started dabbling. And that's where it's like, wow, we didn't even think of like our house, for instance, and really didn't think about it until we had our son who's has asthma and is really susceptible to or has reactions to mold and that kind of thing. So he's kind of like the canary where we don't really know if there's anything bad, but he starts to have reactions, that kind of thing early on. And so that's really what sparked that idea. And we wanted to be able to address that problem in the most natural and simple way possible. And I think that's where we saw that alignment with hemp, in that it really simplifies an overcomplicated building process and solves a lot of the problems that we've created for ourselves. And we can do it in a regenerative way where we're using material that we can essentially, majority of the product is something that we can grow continuously year over year. So yeah, it seemed like a layup. And the only thing left after that was figuring out how to help bring it to the mainstream, which we're still working on.
Tell us about your research on that, and as far as how you went from, hey, we want a healthier way to build. We've got this need. We've got this push. Was it internet search, or did you go to some workshops? I know I met you at Cameron's workshop where y'all were exploring, spray installation of the hempcrete into the panels and if that would work and all that. And that was a fantastic way to workshop both scenarios. But how did you find out about it first? What was your discovery point?
Yeah, so we started with it's the book from the UK. I think it's the Hemp building book. I have a picture of it, of me reading it back in 2018, and it's just I don't know how many hundreds of pages it is, but you can see there it is right there. Dean's holding it up. And I have about maybe 60 tabs on different things. Like that was literally my my study book for a good 6 months. So I just studied that and then started drawing up plans to build a house or build a small structure on our property. It was like a workshop or a backyard office, and then spent another few months trying to figure out where to get materials, at least in this continent, versus having to ship from Europe and then get them somehow from the coast to North Dakota cost effectively. So we got lucky. We got some materials from Canada. So I ended up driving up a U-Haul 6 hours to the Canadian border, crossing the border with a bunch of hemp, about 10,000 pounds of hemp in there. They didn't ask questions, so we kept going. And then we got some binder from Pennsylvania at the time, just to make that project work. So that was our first introduction, kind of try by fire, figure it out, take it from the book and run with it, see how we could apply it. And then, yeah, like you said, we've been kind of testing and refining ever since. So we've done a few collaborations with like Cam. We see that spray applied as a really solid application method. And where you do that method, so there, I share this slide occasionally in our pitch decks with like there's all these, there's like the hand cast, there's the spray applied, there's blocks, there's prefab, but all of these can technically intermingle or cross paths a bit here, where it's like you can be doing, for instance, prefab. We do it mostly in a hand cast type method, kind of a modified method is how we do it, but it works really well with spray applied as well. So it doesn't really change our design much. And that was something we worked with Cam, was trying to see how to make that work and how feasible it was. And it's worked out really well. So we've done a few workshops with him and have hopefully a few builds. He's got a lot of panels on the East Coast, so we're trying to get some builds lined up with the stock he has over there from all those workshops that we did.
Yeah, it's just a great way to illustrate all those different scenarios. And we're really excited to have your perspective on the Mastermind group through the Hemp Build School, because there's a lot of people who are wanting to take that next step from hand cast, labor intensive, and then they want to do the time saving efforts of it. They want to have more of a pathway to production. And on that note, as far as that pathway to production, was it your early initial goal to have a building system that you could bring to the market, or were you just interested in building your own structure and doing something for yourself, or was this always something you were wanting to incubate?
That's a really good question. I think early on, it was really just about learning and seeing if what people are talking about and what you find in books, if there's some validity to the idea and if it's actually worth pursuing, that kind of thing. So I didn't have like an idea of like, I'm going to build this and then I'm going to go try to build 100 for other people. Like, I don't think that was even crossed my mind until we finished that build. And that's where I was like, well, what's next? Like, let's start trying to build these for other people. And so we did that with the singular focus of like, we're just going to continue down this path of hand cast on site and do more of these builds. And over time, every single build we had new people on it. So it's like at least myself, sometimes my wife as well, sometimes a couple of people that have been on a couple of jobs, but we always have new people involved on these cast and place builds. And the general consensus is like, wow, this is way harder than I would have expected. And it's like, yes, I agree. Like I'm all for hard work, but I don't know if I can be doing this for the next 30 or 40 years of my life consistently and at scale. And so that's when we started to say, yes, this is the solution that we want to back and pursue, but we need to find a little bit easier way to make it more sustainable, at least for how it gets applied.
Yeah, I have a joke that there has never been a person that has worked on a cast in place job site that has not become an inventor and, so, and coming up with stuff. Tell us about your pathway on some of these first iterations. Was it all, you said you worked some on the cast in place. Was that cast in place in a panel, or did the panelization come as a, hey, there's got to be an easier way?
Yeah, we did cast in place for a number of years there. I think we didn't start to do, I think my first panel that I ever made in my garage was like 2022 at some point. So we'd already been doing it for at least 3 years. And that just sat as an idea for like another year or so before I actually started going deep down that path and figuring out like the actual design and the going through some engineering, hiring some people to get things tightened up on it, that kind of thing. So I think it was a very slow process of like, hey, we just finished a build, and hindsight, it's like, oh, it wasn't too bad. Here's some things we could improve upon. But then over a while, it's like, okay, well, if we like, we're having fun, we're doing a few builds, but if we want to be doing 10 or more of these a year for decades, can we be doing it this way and in our environment, that kind of thing too? Where
Yeah, the build season is very important as well as the efficiency. And I always tell people you're going to get a lot of attention out of the panelization and being a first mover and a leader in this space. And I always encourage people to be prepared to pay for your time and some of your ideas and engaging with you on those things. But what were some of those first interactions where you led to seek out some engineering inputs and some design inputs? Tell us about some of those interactions and what was fruitful, and what are some of the things that that worked for you, or maybe some of the things that we could learn from that were the pain points.
I think some of the biggest initial hurdles were figuring out the kind of common ground of where I could communicate with different like professionals. So like we worked early on with a couple draftsmen, architects, and structural engineer, and understanding. So I'm coming from this background of like I don't have any formal construction background building, so that's a negative as far as they're concerned. Like I don't speak their language. I'm working with a newer product, semi-novel, natural building. That's another negative where it's like, oh, is this worth our time? That kind of deal. And so finding that common ground and being able to present myself professionally and also know what I'm talking about were the biggest hurdles, and that's what probably took the longest. And also just the cost, like there wasn't a lot, and still working towards that, wasn't a lot of money, like extra money that we had for like hiring design professionals, that kind of thing. And so I started teaching myself how to do most of the work, where it's like I'm going to get it 80-90% of the way there, and then have you kind of like I know exactly where we need to go, and I just need your professional input to get that kind of final fine tuning done and that kind of thing. And so that was a long, slow process, but we've refined that over time, and we have a pretty good system now. I'd say that's been the biggest challenge, and then catching up. Almost every project that we're on still, we haven't really worked with repeat professionals or builders, or like really the team changes every single build at this point. So getting really good at how to fast track that communication cycle of like, okay, this is the download, this is what you need to know. Here's the information, here's what we do specifically. And then just having some of those touch points and conversations to make sure everyone's on the same page, and then we can get into the design piece. Otherwise, there's a lot of that kind of back and forth and assumptions upon assumptions that might lead to rework, that kind of thing.
Gene, I see you had a hand. Was there something to throw in at this point in the conversation?
Yeah, I'd love to hear about you. The first time I heard of you, you were working on a recording studio, and so many folks who interested in hempcrete, in Europe, there's an entire industry of sound baffling and using hemp as a sound muffler. Can you talk a little bit about that project?
Yeah, for sure. And I need to go back on my notes, because that was an early on project, and that was our first collaboration with Cameron McIntosh from Amerishoff. So someone had contacted him from South Dakota. His name is Jeremy, really awesome guy, like a true hempster. And he had been involved in the hemp industry for a long time, but wanted to do his worlds collided, where he's like really into hemp and also really into music. And so he was like, okay, well, I'm going to combine them and let's do a recording studio. I already have the space. And so he'd reached out to Cam originally. Cam reached out to me because he's like, hey, you're only like 4 or 5 hours away. Do you want to collaborate on this? And so it worked out really well. It was a really interesting project because we mixing outside. So it was like, I don't know, I think it was like 4,000 linear feet of walls that we had to do. They're all inside, non-load bearing, but they were all like, and I think it was like 7 rooms total. It was a ton of Hempcrete, and we got to do so multiple recording studio rooms, equipment room, and then tied to that, there was also a bar / restaurant like venue for live music, and so they had a walk-in freezer. So we did a Hempcrete freezer also attached to that. It was like multiple unique ideas all piled into one. But yeah, that project was pretty interesting. Uh, one thing that was really exciting about it is it was a hand cast job. So we were doing exclusively hand cast builds at that point. We were dabbling kind of on the back end in prefab, but it was a really good example of the power of Hempcrete with building with Hempcrete as a community, where it's like, to be cost effective, handcast might not make sense, and a lot of times for us it doesn't make sense, like for hiring the amount of people we need and bringing equipment, that kind of thing. But in those situations, we had like at least 20 people total throughout the process, throughout the week, that were involved, that were helping out, that were interested in learning about it, and like genuinely wanted to see what we were up to. And we had like even a couple people that were off the street that were like, okay, we've seen you a couple days now in a row, what is going on here? And they put gloves on and helped with us, which was just kind of crazy. But that was probably one of my favorite builds just because of that, where it's like, this is a community building event, and it's something where like they do have open houses where people can go see it, and they have like food trucks and stuff. So that's like, to me, that's like the origin of hemp building. Like that's the true roots there. Those are exciting.
Well, I think it's the first job site I've heard of that took walk-ins.
Right. Yeah. It was a unique time, and they were very helpful, and it was there was very much, we had training wheels on there for that, where it's like people are literally like, you become almost unproductive when you have that many people. Like our sweet spot is like 4 to 6 person crew, and when you have 15 plus, it's like you're spending most of the time like hand holding, making sure people are doing what they need to. People are taking like little buckets and throwing a handful in at a time, and asking lots of questions. But it's also, yeah, it's fun. So
well, we'll get in more of the technical side on the actual mastermind group when we get a chance to meet and unpack and have some of the nuts and bolts that we can discuss about on that. But you mentioned questions in those FAQs and frequently asked questions. Are there ones that you see that people ask you more often than not that you'd like people to know about your system, and specifically the panel system, and what you're doing?
Yeah, so I suppose some of the initial questions that we get almost every time, like as we're kind of like, people start very broad, and then you have to kind of bring it in of like, this is what it can do, this is what it can't do. And so what we focus on specifically right now is just on wall panels. So just that exterior envelope, anything that needs to be insulated, structural, ideally, otherwise there's some overkill aspect to it. But so we focus on that exterior envelope. We don't do foundations, and we don't do the roof system. There's more complexity, there's more liability. If you wanted to do, so in our region, R50 is the standard for the roof. That's a lot of Hempcrete. That's like 25 inches of Hempcrete. That's an engineering challenge right there. And how do I get that in place? Those kinds of things. So that's one of the reasons we don't do anything beyond walls right now. And we think there's other products that are just as good, or have great complement Hempcrete well, to where we can use those materials instead. But so that's usually one of the early on ones, is what our focus is on. The characteristics as far as like the weight and the R value. And so we usually refer to the IRC code, because we're in different areas almost every time we build right now versus having like a standard pocket. We usually have to bring up that IRC code as a reference, the IRC appendix, saying this is kind of best practice. This is how we follow it. We deviate somewhat, but these are the ways we're similar. And so we use that kind of as a roadmap as far as like showing that it does have, certain properties that we can rely on, some consistencies, as well as kind of the general outline of like how the material works and the systems that work with it. And so that's where the majority of our questions come from and can be answered when we refer to that document, is like things like, what are we removing from the wall? And then what can we put on it? If we're talking like vapor open materials, like does it have to be exposed? Can we put drywall on it? Those kinds of questions can quickly be kind of eliminated or answered when we're doing that first overview, looking at things like the IRC code.
Yeah, and so your panel is an engineered panel, and so where some people would have, like the prototype house that I did, the whole set of plans was engineer stamped, and then you have the components that are engineer stamped. Tell us about that and how you came about that engineering engagement, and how do you like to guide that conversation when people are wanting to engage with you about speccing your panels?
Yeah, so we ride kind of a fine line with our panel system, where the core component of the panel itself can comply with conventional construction as far as like the structural component. We stay in line with that. So if we have, like, most of our builds are single story, we have a set way that we frame in that way. It can be inspected as it normally would on site, even though it's insulated, which is a unique thing that we ran into, where people, like, we've had building officials be like, we always inspect the framing, then the insulation, but we don't have specific rules that say we can't do them out of order, but we just always do this. So how are we supposed to do this? Is like, well, you just answered your own question. Like, just look at the framing first, and then the insulation, you can see everything that you need to. That's the structural component. But so guiding through those kind of conversations, there's a little bit more hand holding. But I think that the panelization kind of streamlines it a little bit, with having kind of the end product that we kind of control what goes into it. And so the outside, like I was saying, is that structural component, where we can reference that typical IRC code that's already established for framing. And then the IRC appendix is what we reference for the Hempcrete component within it. And then what we really worked on was like the structural, what we did with like structural engineering and some design things, is like the guts of how the panel works, and having those kind of components engineered to satisfy the needs we need for, one, the structural integrity for the panel itself, but also for maintaining the integrity of the Hempcrete as much as possible. Those kinds of things, because Hempcrete is something that has some flexibility and can move, but it really is a rigid material. So once it's cured, it doesn't really like to be shifted and twisted and those kinds of things. And so making sure that there's a certain amount of rigidity to it, that kind of thing is what we've been working on.
Nice. Well, you had some good stories about the where it was a sound studio that had a restaurant and a walk-in freezer and all that. I know you had a really intriguing project that you just finished up with the Lower Sioux, and a project that was there. I'll let you tell any stories that you want about that, or any other project that you've got going on before we wrap up. What are some of the stories that have made a part of your story come alive, and anything you want to share?
Yeah, so I think that the one in the Lower Sioux, I was just pulling up to refresh my memory what the size was. So they built a number of structures really quickly last year. Danny was leading that crew, and one of the ones that they worked on, and that was our install that we did in December, was with them, kind of proving that, like, they're in a northern climate, they're in Minnesota, we're in North Dakota, that you can build year round. You just have to do the right steps in the right order and pick a good day, ideally. But yeah, so they had, I think it was 20 by 26 square foot building, basically like a tiny home. It was like 500, just over 500 square feet, 750 cubic feet. We did a foot thick wall. But basically it was like a 1-bedroom, living room, kitchen, bathroom, that kind of thing. And so what we would have estimated for that build is probably like a day to day and a half of framing, at least, and then probably 4 days on site for Hempcrete. Wouldn't do it in December. But what we did, which was kind of an eye opener for us, because we had a good crew and we knew the process already. We had gone through it a couple of times, and it was kind of cold. So it's like everyone's like moving quickly. We're not messing around too much. But So this job that would have taken us at least 5 to 6 working days to do on site, we ended up doing it in 4 hours. When I got there, foundation was done, unloaded the panels, stood them up by hand. And that's where we discovered it was actually faster to build that way versus using a machine and moving them around. But yeah, so we finished in 4 hours. I was like, well, I'm done. I'll hang out for a little bit and then I'm just going to go home. We did not expect that. But so yeah, that was pretty exciting. And then that kind of became our standard of like, okay, well, here's some things we can tweak. And that happened to go really well because we had a good crew and things just worked out. How can we repeat that and how can we improve upon that? And so now that timeline has kind of become our standard of how can we continue to do that. And so we just did our last build was in Shreveport, Louisiana. And that was a full size house. That was a two bedroom, one bath farmhouse that we did down there. And that one, the timing was approximately the same per panel. It took us 10 hours, but it was a much bigger structure. And so, yeah, we were able to build a house in a day basically. And it was raining and gross, but we were still able to get it done. So that's kind of where we see that. That's what excites me and gets me going and trying to do more of these projects, is to kind of showcase. It's like, hey, we've done some really long days. Like like the recording studio. That's where the first time that I used the term cam days, because I was working with Cam and we're working like literally 14 hours. Like there's one day we worked till 2 a.m. because he had to fly out the next day. And
He's
it's like,
a machine.
yeah, we either get it done or we have everyone comes back tomorrow. And it's like, well, we only have Cam, so let's just knock it out. So yeah, knocked it out. And those are not uncommon for Hempcrete building days. And those days, like that was like 275 cubic feet, I think we installed by hand that day. And that's a great day. In comparison to like that, the hand cast build or the prefab build we did, I think I said 730 cubic feet in 4 hours, because it's already done. So it's not cheating, but I mean, we had a different strategy there. It worked out obviously, but the hand cast, that's kind of where we see the advantage, and the potential of it.
Well, you've got some exciting momentum, and we're glad to have you on as a contributor. And if people want to reach out to you and connect with you, how's the best way? Some people just it's an email or nothing. Some people it's Instagram or LinkedIn. How's the best way to get hold of you?
Yeah, so whatever works best, I guess, for people that are interested. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. Our website, Homeland Hempcrete, has a short little intake form where you can give a little bit of information about like what you're looking for, if you're building something or just have questions, where you're located. Those things kind of help round out the conversation early on so that we can kind of best help you and do it in a quick fashion. So yeah, website's probably best, but social media, we respond pretty quickly within a day or so to that as well.
What are some of the things that you've got on the horizon that intrigue you the most?
So we're working right now. Couple things internally. We're working on a handful of pieces of custom equipment. So we've figured out a really good product, the end product of the design of how that should work and how to adjust it based on variables for the build, different sizes for windows, that kind of thing. We figured that out. We figured out how to take the process inside in a safe manner, dust control, that kind of thing, and repeatable, and be able to do it year round so we don't have to be going outside. That was the next step. The next step for us is to take out more of the manual component, the manual labor component. It's already been cut, I would say probably 25 to 30%. Most of the time it's just two people working on when we're building these panels. Sometimes it's just myself when we're in a pinch, and that just can't be done economically, or it's not worthwhile to do that on site usually. But the goal is to be able to produce with 1 to 2 people as efficiently at a high pace. And so we're working on some custom equipment. That's really been our focus the last 6 months and the next few months ahead. And we're also, so that's the internal side, and that's really what my focus has been on. And we're working on a couple different multi-story builds right now, which we haven't done. It's all been theory. of how we do that. So that'll be exciting to see how that all comes together, because one of the biggest hurdles with prefab is precision. Like, you need to be precise. Cuts have to be exact. That leave the line rule, those kinds of things, with those kind of questions, that's not, you can't be operating at those margins there. And so that just becomes, that compounds if you're going multi-story. And so that's what we're working and planning to. We have at least 2 opportunities to cross that bridge this year, and we're planning on doing it successfully. So
Any aspects of commercial on the horizon? That's fantastic, being able to go up 2 stories.
right, this year I don't know. We're working on some multi-family type builds. That will be kind of the closest segue. I think next year there are a couple opportunities. These tend to have long lead times, especially if we want to execute really well. And so we have a couple that I know that are most likely going to get pushed. It's just the way that you can get a sense pretty early on. But to do it right and to reduce the friction and stress when things get closer, and when there's things like job site delays, those kinds of things, it's worth the wait. And so, yeah, I think the closer we're going to get to anything beyond residential or purely individual housing is going to be the multi-unit, with the goal of some commercialization next year.
Well, when I met you, you were putting those panels together by yourself, and you can learn a lot about somebody just by how they work and what they do and how they do it. And I really liked what you were all about and how you were going about things. And I really enjoyed hearing about your story and just how it progressed and constant improvement and efficiency. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you've got coming up. Gene, did you have any other questions before we wrap up?
I think probably during the class you're going to tell us about the Louisiana project, because I'm a big fan of Joel Holton's, and I was trying to get him to agree to apply to South by Southwest to talk about that, and he kind of got cold feet. So, but now you guys are actually doing it, because he was, a lot of weird things happened. The site had to change and all this other stuff, and now you guys are actually doing it. So
It's
excited about that. Let's talk about that during the class.
Yep, for sure.
Well, we'll go ahead and wrap up this section of it, and everybody reach out to Matt and get to know him better, and then join us on the Mastermind group. He'll be a contributor on there, and then that'll be in with the library of what people can reference ongoing. And so we'll wrap up now.